conceal yourself from the person in need. And I do it too. And what God is saying here is he says, listen, cover them. If they're naked, if they need clothes, cover them. Don't cover yourself. Don't conceal yourself. Don't protect yourself. Don't look out for yourself. They need immediate aid right now. I got to admit to you, when I first read this passage, I got there and God says, is not this the kind of fasting I've chosen, to share your food with the hungry? I thought, booyah, that means I can eat. You know, I thought God doesn't really need me to go a whole day without food. I can fast and eat with someone else. And then I thought, wait a minute, sharing my food means I'm giving up something. Tomorrow I can't eat twice as much as I didn't eat today. You know, tomorrow I'm going to have less. If I share what I have today, tomorrow I'm going to have less, right? If I divide my food with hungry people, tomorrow I'm going to have less. If I use my material resources, my money, my power, whatever I have, and I share that with other people, tomorrow I'm going to have less. God's going to address that too. So stick with me. But before we get there, verse 8, then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and He will say, here am I. That's everything that I've ever wanted. Light, healing, righteousness, glory, and God saying, here am I. That's everything that I've ever wanted. I've wanted the light of God's guidance. I've wanted His righteousness in my life. I've wanted to experience the glory of God in my midst. And I've wanted God to say, here am I. That's all the stuff I've ever wanted in my whole life, and it's right there in 2 verses. Then, that's the problem. It starts with the word then. If you work for lasting justice, provide immediate aid, then all these things are going to happen. Listen, to hear God, He says, then I'm going to come and I'm going to say, here am I. To hear God and to have God hear us, we need to care for the powerless. Keep going. The second half of verse 9 starts the whole thing over again. God says another if. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, okay, we're right back to this thing. It's so important, God has to say it twice. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will shine, your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. There are just a couple things I want to highlight from this part that's new compared to the previous time he said this. The first piece that's new goes all the way back up in verse 9 at the end of that, where he says, with the pointing finger. How many of you remember Chip Neuenschwander? Do any of you remember that guy? Okay, he was a part of our church for a while, and he used to work at Disneyland. And he taught me a lesson about Disneyland. And you probably remember this lesson because he told everybody this lesson every time he ever talked to them about Disneyland. And it was the one cardinal rule of what you don't do at Disneyland. Does anybody remember the one cardinal rule of what? What's that? Yeah, you don't point. See, everybody knows this. You don't point, right? At Disneyland, but you don't ever point anywhere. You don't use one finger to point. You have 2 ways of pointing. If someone says, hey, where's the Matterhorn? You say, it's over there, and you do the 2-finger point, or you do the full hand point. It's over there, okay? That's the Disney way of directing people somewhere. Why? Because pointing one finger in many cultures in our world is considered an offensive thing, as much as in America we use one finger pointed straight up sometimes, and we're not talking about God or how important you are. So sometimes that one finger can be an offensive thing, and that's what God is saying here in this passage. He says if you get rid of that attitude, get rid of that malicious talk, that accusatory tone. And I know some of you, like me, would say, wait a minute, I'm not accusing the poor for being poor. I don't have a negative attitude really towards them. I just really don't know how to help them, when to help them, who to help them, things like that. Well, let me highlight something for you. There are two guys I know who back in 2010 had rough years. Two guys that I know who had, I haven't met them personally. I'd like to meet them both personally. I think it would be neat. But two guys who've had really rough years in 2010. And I want to ask you, between these two fellows, which one of these guys you would be more likely to take into your home? So I'm going to have the pictures up here on the screen. Which of these two guys would you be more likely to take into your home? Okay, guy number one. This is Ted Williams. He's the man with the golden radio voice. Okay, how many of you have seen the YouTube clips of Ted Williams doing his radio voice talking? Okay, so there's Ted Williams. Would you take him into your house? Okay, and then here's the second guy. Would you take this guy into your house? I'll step back here. Can you see that? That's Peyton Manning. Okay, he had a rough year this last year, and I recently heard that he lost his job because the whole NFL players are locked out, and there's this weird situation going on. So he's out of work. He's not necessarily homeless, but he's out of work. So he might be homeless. I don't even know how well he's managing his money. But which of these two guys, if they showed up at your doorstep and said, hey, I need a place to stay for the night, which of these two guys would you let into your house? Yeah, I totally let Manning into my house. It's not even a question. I'd be like, dude, whoa, come on in. What can I get for you? I'll give you my whole fridge. There you go. I'll fast for 9 days if I'm just giving you the food. I like this guy. But with Ted Williams, I wouldn't do that because I doubt him. You know, I've never met either of these guys, but I can tell which one of these guys is a better person, right? No, I can't. I have no idea. And that's what God says, if you get rid of that attitude. See, that's part of our problem with helping people. I talked about this before. Part of my problem is that I want to make sure they're held accountable for the mistakes they make in their lives. Ted Williams doesn't have a job right now because he's an alcoholic and isn't going to he's not going to go to rehab. He was actually hired by a radio station in Chicago and decided he wasn't going to, or Cincinnati, I think, and then decided he wasn't going to do that. He wasn't going to go to rehab because he just didn't want to go down that path. And I can use that to accuse him. But the real story is that something happened in his life that put him in a position that he probably doesn't deserve to be in. And I'm not doing anything, and I don't know of